Hands off the bag. Step back from the storefront. Do it slow and do it now. The order came over a patrol cruiser's loudspeaker on Beaumont Street at 9:47 on a Saturday morning. The woman it was aimed at did not move the way someone hearing it for the first time would have moved. She did not flinch. She did not lift her palms. She set down a paper coffee cup on the curb, eased her tote off her shoulder, and placed it flat on the bricks. Then she straightened, slow, deliberate, the kind of slow that has rules behind it. A second cruiser slid in behind the first. A third pulled up across the street. 3 vehicles for one woman with a tote bag and a coffee. Up the boardwalk, the boutique window framed a face watching with quiet satisfaction. Inside the cruiser, the dispatch radio crackled with the call that had pulled them here. A clipped voice, female, agitated, was reading the same line back to the responding unit a second time. Black female, mid-40s, casing storefronts, suspicious. The phrase came through the radio twice. Twice was deliberate. Twice was how it would later read on paper. The cruiser door opened. A second cruiser door opened. A third door opened. The woman on the bricks did not turn her head. She watched the reflection of 3 uniforms approaching her in the dark glass of the storefront across the street. Her right hand stayed where the order had placed it. Her left hand stayed where the order had placed it. And under her jacket, against her hip, in a pocket she had not yet been asked about, sat a small black notebook with a license plate written on the first page in fresh ink. That license plate would matter later. By the time anyone in the department understood why, 3 careers would be over and a 4th would be hanging by a thread. But first, the strike. 40 hours earlier, on a Thursday red-eye out of a city she had spent 14 years working toward and the better part of 2 decades surviving, Naomi Hartwell buckled into a window seat with a small leather case across her lap and watched the runway lights fall away. The case held a uniform she had not yet worn in public, a set of personnel forms she had not yet signed in front of a witness, and a small black notebook that traveled with her everywhere. The notebook was a habit. It had been a habit before it had been useful, and it had been useful for a very long time. She had not told anyone in Cape Lorton County she was coming early. A new chief did not walk into a department blind on day 1. A new chief walked the streets first, on her own time, with her own eyes, in clothes that did not ask to be respected. Naomi had done this in 2 prior commands. She would have done it in this one even if her contract had not required it. The contract did not require it. What the contract required, and what the city had told no one outside the search committee, was that the new chief of the Cape Lorton County Police Department would be sworn in at 9 a.m. at City Hall. That gave her Friday and the weekend. She checked in to the Sea Maris Inn on Friday afternoon under her maiden name, Hartwell, paid with a personal card, and signed the register in the careful, looping hand she had been signing things in since she was 8 years old. The clerk looked up. The clerk looked down at the card. The clerk looked up again. He asked for a second piece of identification. Naomi gave her her driver's license without comment. He turned it 2 times. He apologized in a voice that was not quite an apology and not quite an explanation, and he handed her the room key. She did not write anything in the notebook for that one. She kept walking. The boardwalk on a Friday evening in Cape Lorton County smelled like salt and fried dough and the slow exhale of a town that had been making most of its money off summer people for 120 years. Naomi walked the length of it twice. She watched the foot traffic. She watched the rhythm of the patrols. She clocked 2 cruisers cycling past the same corner inside 7 minutes, which was twice the frequency the department's published deployment plan called for. She wrote the times in the notebook. She wrote the cruiser numbers. She heard a dispatcher's voice through an open driver window, clipped, female, fast on her consonants, and a shift handoff she watched behind a coffee kiosk at 7:04 p.m. On the second pass, she noticed the boutique. The window of Vance and Daughter Mercantile faced the boardwalk with a careful arrangement of summer linens and a hand-lettered sign about a sale ending Saturday. Inside the window stood a woman in her 50s in a cream blouse and pearl studs, arms folded, watching the boardwalk the way a property owner watches a property. The woman's eyes followed her for the full length of the storefront and did not stop following her when Naomi turned at the corner and started back the other way. Naomi wrote the boutique name in the notebook. She did not write anything else about it. Some things you noticed and did not need to name yet. Saturday morning, she was out of the inn before 6 a.m. She walked the residential blocks behind Beaumont Street first, then circled back toward the commercial strip as the cafes opened. She bought a coffee at a place called Tidewater Roast. The young woman behind the counter handed her the cup with both hands and called her ma'am in a way that suggested she had been raised right and was working at it. Naomi tipped $4 on a $4 coffee and kept walking. If you're following along, tap the like button and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it tells us to keep building stories like this one.
At 9:34, she crossed Beaumont and stopped to read a posted sign on the lamppost outside Vance and Daughter Mercantile. The sign was a city ordinance notice about loitering on commercial frontage between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. She read it once because she always read posted notices once. She did not loiter. The hours did not apply. She tucked the position of the sign into memory, finished her coffee, and started to step away from the curb. The boutique door opened. The woman in the cream blouse came out onto the sidewalk with the phone already at her ear. She did not look at Naomi directly. She looked just past her, the way some people look at something they have decided not to acknowledge, but very much intend to discuss. The call to dispatch was placed at 9:37. In the notebook, Naomi wrote the time. She wrote the words cream blouse, pearl studs, mid-50s, owner presenting. She wrote the storefront number. She did not write the phrase she would only hear later, the phrase that would be played back to a room of city council members on a Wednesday afternoon 5 weeks from now. Black female, mid-40s, casing storefronts. She did not yet know that was the phrase. She only knew that a woman who had watched her walk past twice on Friday had picked up a phone on Saturday morning, and that 2 cruisers normally on patrol 3 blocks east had just changed their pattern. She finished her coffee. She kept her hands visible. She waited. The first cruiser came in fast and dry, no siren. The lights stayed off. The vehicle pulled up at the curb with the front tire angled in the way a vehicle is angled when the driver does not intend to leave quickly. The door opened. The officer who stepped out was tall, mid-30s, sandy hair cropped short, a build that read like a former wrestler who still ran the same hill twice a week. The name tape over the right chest pocket read Pruitt. The badge number was 481. Naomi noted both before he had taken 3 steps. He did not announce himself by name. He did not state cause. He said the same line that had come through the cruiser loudspeaker 40 seconds earlier, which meant he had cued the announcement before he had taken the time to look at the woman he was announcing it at. Naomi set down her coffee. She slid the tote off her shoulder. She put both items where they could be seen. She straightened up. Her hands stayed at her sides, palms turned slightly forward. She did not speak yet. 2 more cruisers arrived. A second officer joined Pruitt at the curb. A third, sergeant stripes on his sleeve, stayed at his vehicle, one hand on the open door, watching. Pruitt closed the distance.
ID, he said. May I ask the statutory basis for the stop? Naomi said. Her voice was low and even, the way a voice is even when it has said this exact sentence in this exact tone in 3 different states. I'd like to understand the reasonable articulable suspicion. The phrase changed the temperature of the sidewalk by about 10 degrees. Pruitt's jaw set. The sergeant at the 3rd cruiser looked over the roof of his car for the first time. A woman walking her dog on the far side of the street stopped, lifted her phone, and began recording. A man at a bistro table 2 storefronts down did the same. A teenage boy on a bicycle slowed, looped back, and parked. I'm not going to ask you twice, Pruitt said. You haven't asked me once for anything I have a legal obligation to provide. I'm not refusing to identify. I'm asking the basis. You can tell me and we can move forward. The sergeant, Fletcher, 22 years on the force, 4 of them as shift supervisor, did not move from the 3rd cruiser. He should have. Department policy required a supervising officer to verbally take command of any stop that escalated past the initial contact phase. The policy was 3 years old. It had been written after a settlement. Doss knew the policy. He stayed where he was. Pruitt reached for Naomi's wrist. She did not pull away. She did not stiffen. She did not curl her hand into a fist. She let him take her wrist. She turned her head, slow, toward the bistro table where the man with the phone was recording, and she said, clear enough for the phone's microphone to pick up, Officer Pruitt, badge 481, has placed his hand on me at 9:50 a.m. at the corner of Beaumont and 4th without stating cause. The man at the bistro table swallowed. Pruitt's grip tightened. What happened next happened in 7 seconds and would later be reconstructed across 2 body cams, 3 civilian phones, and 1 boutique security camera whose existence Charlotte Vance would, on Sunday afternoon, attempt to deny. Pruitt pivoted Naomi toward the cruiser hood. She did not resist the pivot. He pushed her shoulders down onto the hood. She bent at the waist as instructed. He told her to spread her feet. She did. He told her to stop talking. She had not been talking. The boutique door opened again. Charlotte Vance stepped out onto the sidewalk and folded her arms across her chest and watched. It was the watching that did it. Whatever had been building in Pruitt, the phrase, the question, the steady voice, the woman who would not give him the reaction he had preloaded the whole stop to receive, broke loose when he looked up and saw the boutique owner watching her, watch him. He needed to be seen doing something. He turned Naomi around. He pulled her upright. He said, I told you to be quiet, and his open palm came across the left side of her face at 9:51 a.m. on a Saturday in June. The sound of it carried. The dog walker across the street covered her mouth with her free hand. The bistro man's phone shook for the first time. The teenage boy on the bicycle whispered something his mother would not have approved of. Charlotte Vance did not move. Doss, at the 3rd cruiser, finally took 1 step forward and stopped. Naomi's head turned with the blow. It did not snap back. She let her body absorb the motion the way a body absorbs motion when the body has been trained to absorb motion. And then she returned her head to center, and she looked at Officer Caleb Pruitt with eyes that did not blink. South Carolina Code, Section 16-5-50, she said, assault and battery by a public officer in the course of official duty. You will want to write that down before your sergeant writes it for you. Pruitt's face did something complicated. The cuffs came out. The cuffs went on at 9:52. They went on hard. Pruitt pulled the left arm back farther than the angle required and held it there an extra second before he closed the steel. Naomi did not make a sound. Doss, having taken his single step forward, retreated to the 3rd cruiser and picked up the radio. The boutique door closed. From inside the window, Charlotte Vance watched the cuffs go on with the same expression a person wears at an estate auction when an item they had been waiting on finally crosses the block. Across the street, the dog walker had been joined by an older man in a fishing cap who had come out of the cafe holding a half-eaten muffin. Neither of them moved. The man at the bistro table was still recording, his phone tilted now so that his coffee was in the frame, which would later mean the timestamp was admissible. The teenage boy on the bicycle was recording too. So were two patrons who had come out of the bookshop next door to see what the noise was. By 9:54, the corner of Beaumont and 4th had 11 phones pointed at it from 6 different angles. What none of those phones captured was the conversation happening inside the second cruiser. Otis Brennan, 29 years old, lived in the apartment above the bookshop. He had come down the back stairs barefoot when he heard the slap. He had reached the corner just in time to see the cuffs go on. He filmed the last 14 seconds of the cuffing and the first 8 seconds of the perp walk to the back of Pruitt's cruiser. He stopped recording when Pruitt looked up and noticed him. Otis Brennan did not know Charlotte Vance personally. He did not work for her. What he did know was that his landlord, the woman who owned the apartment above the bookshop, the woman who had not raised his rent in 3 years, was Charlotte Vance's sister. He knew his rent. He knew his lease was up in September. He thought about this for about 40 seconds, standing on the sidewalk in his bare feet. Then he opened his phone, opened the video, and began editing. By 10:03 a.m., a 14-second clip had been posted to 2 local community pages with the caption, "Resisting arrest on Beaumont this morning. 3 officers down for 1. Scary out here." The clip began with Naomi already cuffed. It ended with her being placed in the back of Pruitt's cruiser. The slap was not in it. The question about statutory basis was not in it. The phrase casing storefronts was not in it. The clip would be shared 2,200 times before noon. Inside Pruitt's cruiser, Naomi sat in the back seat with her hands cuffed behind her and her head against the seat back and her eyes closed. Her breathing was slow. Her notebook, which she had not been asked to surrender and which Pruitt had not searched her tote for, was still in the inside pocket of her jacket against her hip. The license plate she had written on the first page was still legible. The cruiser pulled away from the curb at 10:06. The drive to the Cape Lorden County Sheriff's Office substation on River Road took 11 minutes. Pruitt did not speak during the drive. He kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She did not look at him. She looked out the window and watched the town move past. And somewhere around the 3rd mile, she made a small private decision about who she was going to call when they let her have a phone. And the decision was not the one most people in cuffs would have made.
At 10:18 a.m., she was processed into the substation by a booking clerk named Hazel Pell. Hazel Pell was 24 years old, 3 years on the job, the daughter of a man who had retired from this same substation 6 years ago after a 27-year career that had ended on bad terms with then-Lieutenant Raymond Ainsley. Hazel Pell did not say any of this when she took Naomi's information. She typed quietly. She did not ask Naomi to repeat her name. She did not ask Naomi to repeat her date of birth. She typed and she watched the screen. And at one point she paused and read something twice, and then she typed again. Pruitt was in the back room with Doss. Through the partial wall, their voices came out in fragments. Naomi could hear "tensed her arm in defensive resistance and failed to comply with lawful commands," and "I observed her hand move toward her waistband." She heard Doss say, slow and careful, "Read it back to me one more time, son, but slow this time, and remember the camera was on you the whole walk-up." She heard Pruitt swear, soft. She heard Doss say, "We can fix the language, we cannot fix the camera." Hazel Pell pretended to be typing. At 10:31 a.m., Naomi was permitted her one phone call. She was led to a wall-mounted phone in the booking corridor. Pruitt stood 6 feet back. Doss stood 3 feet behind Pruitt. Hazel Pell stayed at her desk and made a show of looking at her screen and did not look up. Naomi dialed a number she had committed to memory in the third week of her last command, a number that did not belong to a lawyer, did not belong to a journalist, did not belong to her mother or her sister or anyone she would have wanted to comfort her. It belonged to a woman named Audrey Marsh, who had been a lieutenant in internal affairs at Naomi's previous department for 9 years and had transferred to Cape Lorden County's IA division 11 months ago at Naomi's quiet personal recommendation. The call went 4 rings. Audrey Marsh picked up. "It is me," Naomi said. "I am at the River Road substation. I was stopped at 9:47 on Beaumont at the corner of 4th. The responding officer is Caleb Pruitt, badge 481. The supervising officer on scene was Sergeant Fletcher Doss. I was struck once, open palm, left side of the face, at 9:51. 6 civilian phones captured it. 2 body cams should have. I have not been formally charged. I have not requested counsel. I am requesting that you secure the body cam files within the next 90 minutes, and I am asking you not to call anyone in the department about it yet." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Understood," Audrey Marsh said. "I will be in your office Monday at 10 a.m. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi hung up. Pruitt's face, the part of it that Naomi could see in the reflection of the booking room window, did something that was not quite confusion and was not quite suspicion, but was on the road from one to the other. Doss heard the "yes, ma'am." Doss filed it. Doss did not yet know what to do with it. Hazel Pell, at her desk, straightened her back. She did not realize she had done it. She straightened it the way a person straightens her back when she has just understood that the room she is in has more people of consequence in it than she had previously believed. The straightening was small. Naomi saw it. Pruitt did not. Doss did, and read it as Hazel Pell being intimidated by a noisy detainee, and made a mental note to talk to her about her posture later. Take a breath here. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the like and subscribe buttons are right there. They help us keep finding stories the world tries to bury. At 10:55 a.m., Charlotte Vance arrived at the substation to make a formal statement. She wore a different blouse. She had freshened her lipstick. She brought a printed page of notes which she set on the counter in front of Hazel Pell and tapped with one manicured finger. The notes were typed. They had not been typed since the call. They had been typed before. The phrase, "I observed her approach the storefront with what I would describe as predatory intent," appeared in the 3rd paragraph. Hazel Pell took the statement. She did not type the phrase in. She wrote a summary. The summary was 3 sentences long. Charlotte Vance asked to speak with the officer who had made the arrest. Doss came out and walked her to a side room. They were in the side room for 19 minutes. When Charlotte Vance came out, she was satisfied. When Doss came out, he was a little less satisfied than he had been before he went in. There had been something in her tone, in the 3rd or 4th sentence she had said behind the closed door, that he had not liked. He could not name it yet. He filed that too. At 12:04 p.m., Naomi was offered the standard bail paperwork on a misdemeanor disorderly charge with an added count of resisting arrest. The bail had been set at $2,500. The arraignment was scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. at the Cape Lorden County Magistrates Court. Naomi looked at the paperwork. She looked at Hazel Pell. She looked at Doss, who had come out to oversee the paperwork because Pruitt was no longer trusted to be in the room. "I will waive the bail interview," Naomi said. "I am requesting a magistrate continuance to Monday afternoon. I do not want this heard at 10 a.m. I want it set for 2 p.m. or later, and I want it in front of any magistrate other than Magistrate Hollis." Doss's eyebrows moved. Magistrate Hollis was the sitting Saturday magistrate. The reason a person stopped on Saturday morning would know to ask not to be heard by Magistrate Hollis was not a reason any of the people in the booking corridor wanted to think about right now. "I am not sure that request is going to be entertained, ma'am," Doss said. "It will be," Naomi said. "Please walk it upstairs." He walked it upstairs. Captain Raymond Ainsley, the interim chief of the Cape Lorden County Police Department, was at the substation that morning because he was always at the substation on Saturday mornings, the same way he had been every Saturday morning for the past 4 years, because Saturday morning was when he reviewed weekend incident reports and signed off on what was going to land on the chief's desk on Monday. The chief's desk had been empty for 14 months. The chief's desk was supposed to stop being empty in approximately 43 hours. Captain Ainsley took the magistrate continuance request from Doss without looking up from the report he was reading. He signed it. He handed it back. He did not read the name of the detainee on the request. He did not read it because it was Saturday, and because he was tired, and because the new chief was arriving Monday, and because he had decided 2 weeks ago that he was going to apply for early retirement on day 3 of the new chief's tenure, and a Saturday morning misdemeanor continuance was not a thing he was going to spend professional energy on. That signature would later be the third item on the internal affairs timeline. At 12:04 p.m., Naomi was released to her own recognizance pending the Monday afternoon arraignment. Her tote was returned to her. The notebook in her jacket pocket had not been touched. Her phone, which had been bagged at booking, was returned to her with the bag seal intact. She walked out the front door of the River Road substation into the noon sun. She did not look back at the building. She did not check her phone. She walked 2 blocks east, found a bench under a live oak tree, and sat down. She took the notebook out of her jacket pocket, uncapped a pen. On a fresh page, in the same careful hand she had been writing in since she was 8, she wrote a list of names. The list had 6 names on it when she closed the notebook. 3 of those names belonged to people who had not yet entered the story.
Sunday morning came in slow and overcast. Naomi was up before 5. She made coffee in the small machine in the inn room. She sat in the chair by the window and reread the notebook from beginning to end. She did not eat. She did not turn on the television. At 6:30, she made one phone call to a man named Ezra Calloway, a retired civil rights attorney who had spent 34 years filing complaints against police departments up and down the Carolina coast. And at 7:15, she met him in the parking lot of the Community Legal Aid Office, where he still kept a desk, and sat with him in his car for 41 minutes. Ezra Calloway was 68 years old. He had filed 2 wrongful death suits against the Cape Lorton County PD in the past 11 years. Both had settled quietly. He had been waiting a long time for a conversation that began the way this one began. He listened. He did not interrupt. When Naomi finished, he was quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he said, "Miss Hartwell, what would you like me to do today?" The way he said Miss Hartwell was the way a man says a name when he knows 3 things about the person and has decided not to say 2 of them. She gave him 3 tasks. The first was a public records request, filed in his name as a private citizen, for the dispatch audio of the 911 call placed from inside Vance and Daughter Mercantile at 9:37 a.m. on Saturday. The second was a request for the unedited body cam footage from Officer Pruitt's morning shift between 9 a.m. and noon, filed under South Carolina's public records statute. The third was a quiet conversation with a young woman named Marigold Tisdale, who lived in the second-floor walk-up across the street from the boutique and who had been recording from her bedroom window with a phone on a tripod for the entire 7 minutes of the stop, because she had been recording the boardwalk every Saturday morning since March for a side project about coastal foot traffic. Marigold Tisdale's 9-minute and 41-second video included sound. It included the question about statutory basis. It included the slap. It included Charlotte Vance opening the boutique door for the second time at 9:50:04, and it included a wide angle of the third cruiser, which meant Sergeant Doss's failure to take command of the scene was time-stamped and continuous. Marigold Tisdale was willing to share the file. She was not willing to post it publicly until she was told it would be safe to by Monday afternoon at the earliest. By 10 a.m. on Sunday, 2 things had happened that no one in Pruitt's chain of command knew about. The first was that Audrey Marsh, at her desk inside the Internal Affairs Annex 3 miles east, had pulled and time-locked Pruitt's body cam files from the central server along with Doss's, along with the 3rd responding officers, and had backed them up to an external drive in a sealed evidence bag with a chain of custody logs signed by herself and a witness.
The second was that an anonymous envelope had been left at the front desk of the Cape Lorden Sentinel newspaper at 9:17 a.m., containing a single sheet of paper with the case numbers of 3 prior internal affairs complaints against Officer Caleb Pruitt, 2 of which had been sustained and closed without discipline, and the third of which had been ruled inconclusive after the body cam footage was reported as corrupted on the server. The case numbers were real. They were checkable. The reporter on weekend duty at the Sentinel, a 26-year-old named Solomon Cleary, checked them by 10:40. He called his editor at 10:46. His editor told him to sit on it until Monday. Solomon Cleary sat on it, mostly. He did, however, mention the names of the cases to a friend who worked in the city clerk's office because his friend had once dated Caleb Pruitt, and the friend mentioned the names to her supervisor because her supervisor had been the one who handled the original complaint intake on case number 2, and the supervisor mentioned it to her husband, who was a paralegal in the Cape Lorden County District Attorney's office, and the paralegal mentioned it to the assistant district attorney he worked for, whose name was Iris Calder. Iris Calder was 31 years old. She was 3 years into her position. She had been the assistant district attorney on call for misdemeanor arraignments for the past 2 weekends, and she had been informed the previous Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. that her name was on the Monday morning personnel docket for a swearing-in ceremony at City Hall at 9 a.m., at which the new chief of the Cape Lorden County Police Department would be administered the oath. Iris Calder had received the name of the incoming chief on Wednesday afternoon in a sealed envelope. She had read it. She had locked it in her dress drawer. She had not spoken about it to anyone. The name was Naomi Hartwell. Stay with this. Part 2 is where the receipts get read and the room turns. Hit subscribe so the rest of the story finds you the second it drops. At 11:37 p.m. on Sunday night, Iris Calder opened her work email at her kitchen table and saw the Monday morning arraignment docket sitting at the top of her inbox. She scrolled down to the 10 a.m. and post-10 a.m. calendar. She read the names. Her coffee stopped on its way to her mouth. The third name on the 2 p.m. docket, on a misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge with an added count of resisting arrest, was Hartwell, N. Iris Calder set the coffee cup down. She did not pick up her phone. She did not call her supervisor. She did not call the public defender's office. She opened her work calendar, looked at the Monday morning swearing-in ceremony at City Hall at 9 a.m., and then she looked back at the 2 p.m. arraignment docket, and she sat at her kitchen table in a small apartment 3 blocks from the courthouse and understood for the first time in her short career that she was holding a piece of paper that was going to end at least one person's job, and quite possibly several. She picked up her phone at 11:48 p.m. She did not call Naomi. She called Audrey Marsh. Audrey Marsh picked up on the first ring. Naomi's notebook, sitting open on the in-room desk 3 miles south, had one entry on its first page that still had not been crossed out. A license plate, 6 characters. A plate registered in the South Carolina DMV system that Audrey Marsh would access at 12:07 a.m. Monday to a vehicle owned by the spouse of a sitting member of the Cape Lorden County City Council, the same council that would 8 hours later watch Naomi Hartwell take the oath of office.
Audrey Marsh did not sleep on Sunday night. She did not pretend to try. At 12:07 a.m., she ran the plate Iris Calder had read to her on the phone, and the registration came back to a silver sedan owned by Bellatrix Ainsley, the wife of Councilman Bradley Ainsley, who served Cape Lorden County's 3rd District, and who was, by blood, the older brother of Captain Raymond Ainsley, the interim chief of the Cape Lorden County Police Department. The captain, who had signed the magistrate continuance on Saturday morning at 11:37 a.m. without reading the detainee's name, was the brother of a councilman whose wife had been parked across from the Vance and Daughter boutique at 7:02 p.m. on Friday evening, 22 minutes before Charlotte Vance closed her shop, and whose plate Naomi Hartwell had written down because she had watched a woman in pearl studs walk out of the boutique to the silver sedan, lean into the passenger window for 9 minutes, and walk back inside without buying anything. Audrey Marsh saved the registration printout. She saved the call log. She placed the printout and the call log in the same sealed evidence bag as the body cam files. She drove to the IA annex at 3:41 a.m. She made coffee. She waited. At 4:09 a.m., an anonymous packet arrived at her front door at home, which she discovered when she sent a patrol car by to check the porch on a hunch at 5:15 a.m. The packet contained printed timestamps from Officer Caleb Pruitt's last 4 shifts. 2 of those shifts had 10-minute body cam gaps with no entered explanation. The 3rd shift had a 5-minute gap. The 4th shift was clean. The 2 10-minute gaps fell on the same 2 evenings, 1 week apart, at the same intersection. The intersection was Beaumont and 4th. At 6:12 a.m. Monday morning, Sergeant Fletcher Doss arrived at the River Road substation 48 minutes earlier than his shift required and went directly to the report terminal. He intended to do what experienced supervisors do when a report has been written in a hurry on a Saturday by a young officer with adrenaline in his hands. He intended to tighten the language. He intended to soften "failed to comply" into "did not respond to verbal direction." He intended to remove the phrase "I observed her hand move toward her waistband" because the body cam, which he had finally watched at home at 1 a.m., did not support it. He intended to fix the language before anyone above him read the report. The terminal would not let him in. The report had been flagged for internal affairs review at 12:54 a.m. The flag had been placed by Lieutenant Audrey Marsh. The system note read, "Evidence preservation hold. Do not modify. Contact IA before any further entry." Doss stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he turned around and saw the booking clerk, Hazel Pell, standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee, watching him. She had been on shift since 5:30. She had been told by Audrey Marsh in a phone call at 4:40 a.m. exactly what to watch for, exactly what to write down, and exactly which sergeant would be at that terminal before 7. Doss did not know any of this. He nodded at Hazel Pell. Hazel Pell did not nod back. Doss walked out of the report room and made one phone call from the substation's parking lot. The call was to Pruitt. The call lasted 41 seconds. The substance of the call, which would later be reconstructed from Pruitt's cell tower data because Doss had used the substation phone and Pruitt had used his personal phone, was a 4-word instruction: stay home, say nothing. Pruitt did not stay home. Pruitt was, at that moment, standing in his living room in a freshly pressed uniform because Pruitt had been assigned to the perimeter detail at the City Hall swearing-in ceremony at 9 a.m., and Pruitt was not the kind of officer who skipped a ceremony detail because his sergeant told him to. At 8:43 a.m., the rotunda at Cape Lorton City Hall filled with 340 people. The council was seated on the dais. The mayor stood at the podium. The press was 3 deep along the back wall. Solomon Cleary, the Sentinel reporter, was in the second row of the press section, with a notebook open and a folded sheet of paper in his jacket pocket containing the 3 case numbers he had been told to sit on. He had decided at 2 a.m. that he was going to sit on them until he saw the new chief's face. Then he was going to decide. Pruitt stood at parade rest at the east entrance to the rotunda, 15 feet from the dais. He had been instructed to check identification and monitor the room. He did not yet know that his name had been flagged at 4 a.m. He did not yet know that his sergeant had attempted to modify his report at 6:15.
He did not yet know that the Saturday morning detainee, whose name had not registered with him because she had not been wearing the kind of clothes that made names register, was about to walk through the south doors of the rotunda in dress uniform with 3 gold stars on her shoulder. The south doors opened at 8:54. Naomi Hartwell walked down the center aisle. She was flanked by Audrey Marsh and by a woman Pruitt did not recognize, a Justice Department attorney named Susanna Aiken, who had flown in from Washington on a 5 a.m. flight and whose presence in the rotunda would, in approximately 90 seconds, be the second worst piece of news of Captain Raymond Ainsley's career. The worst piece would arrive 4 minutes later. The mayor read the oath. Naomi raised her right hand. She did not look at Pruitt. She did not look at Ainsley. She looked at the mayor, and she repeated the words, and she signed the document on the podium, and the mayor said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the chief of the Cape Lorden County Police Department, Chief Naomi Hartwell." And the rotunda applauded, and Pruitt's face, 15 feet east of the dais, drained of all color in 3 stages: recognition, calculation, then the slower thing under both of those, which was the understanding that the woman's whose cheek he had struck at 9:51 a.m. on Saturday morning was now, at 9:04 a.m. on Monday morning, his employer. She did not give a speech. She thanked the mayor. She thanked the council. She thanked the citizens of Cape Lorden County. She said she looked forward to meeting the men and women of the department and to serving the community with transparency and care. The speech was 90 seconds long. The applause that followed it was polite and uncertain because the rotunda had begun, somewhere in the 3rd row, to whisper. 3 of the people in the 3rd row had seen the Otis Brennan clip on Saturday. One of them had seen the Marigold Tisdale clip, which had been posted at 8:30 a.m. to a regional civil rights legal aid page with the title Cape Lorden County, Saturday morning, Beaumont and 4th, full footage, no edits. Naomi Hartwell stepped down from the podium. She walked, slow and even, across the marble floor toward the east entrance. The press tracked her with their cameras. Audrey Marsh stayed at her left shoulder. Susanna Aiken stayed at her right. The rotunda watched. Pruitt did not move from parade rest because he had not yet decided what moving from parade rest would accomplish. Naomi stopped 6 feet in front of him. The rotunda went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when it understands that the next 30 seconds are going to be on the front page. She did not raise her voice. Officer Pruitt. She said his name the way she had said it on the sidewalk at 9:51 a.m. on Saturday, which was the same, no warmer, no colder. You are relieved of duty pending internal affairs review. Lieutenant Marsh has your paperwork at the annex. You will surrender your sidearm and your badge to her there by 10 a.m. You will not return to the substation. You will not contact any witness in this matter. Do you understand? Pruitt's mouth opened. Pruitt's mouth closed. Pruitt said, "Yes, ma'am." He said it because there was nothing else in that rotunda at 9:07 a.m. in dress uniform in front of 340 witnesses and 7 cameras that a 6-year patrol officer could say. Naomi nodded once. She walked past him. She walked out the east doors. The rotunda exhaled. Captain Raymond Ainsley submitted his early retirement paperwork at 11:41 a.m. on Monday. The paperwork was accepted. The paperwork was also flagged by Audrey Marsh for hold pending IA review of the Saturday morning continuance signature, because a captain who signed a continuance request without reading the detainee's name might, depending on how the rest of the file shook out, be looking at a great deal more than a comfortable retirement. Sergeant Fletcher Doss received a written reprimand at 2 p.m. for attempted modification of a flagged report. The reprimand was sustained at his administrative hearing 6 weeks later. He was reassigned to evidence room supervision, a position he understood correctly to be a slow road out. He did not resign. He stayed because his pension was 18 months away, and because his union representative told him that resigning before the pension vested would be the second worst decision of his career. The first worst decision, his union representative did not need to say, had been made on a sidewalk on Saturday at 9:50:01 a.m. when he had taken one step forward and stopped. Charlotte Vance was served with 2 pieces of paper Tuesday afternoon. The first was a copy of the 911 audio that had been released pursuant to a court order at 4:30 p.m. on Monday, which contained her voice using the phrase "casing storefronts," which she had, in her formal statement on Saturday at 11:09 a.m., denied. The second was a civil complaint filed by Ezra Calloway on behalf of his client, alleging filing a false police report under South Carolina Code Section 16-17-722 and tortious interference. The complaint sought damages. The amount of the damages was left blank. The amount was left blank because Naomi Hartwell had instructed Ezra Calloway on Sunday morning in his car to leave it blank. Because Naomi Hartwell was not interested in the damages, she was interested in the deposition.
The deposition was scheduled for 4 months out. It would not happen. Charlotte Vance's attorney would, 3 weeks before the deposition date, approach Ezra Calloway with a settlement offer that included a non-disclosure agreement and a confidential financial term. Naomi Hartwell would, through Ezra Calloway, accept the settlement and reject the non-disclosure agreement. The final settlement would be partial. The financial term would remain confidential. The factual admission that Charlotte Vance had used the phrase "casing storefronts" and had filed a statement on Saturday afternoon denying she had used it would become part of the public record. The boutique would close in November. The sign would come down on a Tuesday morning. No one would replace it. The federal piece moved slower and went further. Susanna Aiken, the Justice Department attorney who had flown in for the swearing-in, formalized a pattern or practice investigation under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601 against the Cape Lorton County Police Department on a Thursday afternoon, 14 days after the incident. The investigation had been informally open for 11 months. Saturday had given it the document it had been waiting for. The investigation would run for 22 months. It would produce a 184-page report. The report would identify a pattern of stop disparities, body cam handling irregularities, and supervisory failures across a 4-year window. The report would recommend a consent decree. The consent decree negotiations would begin in the 2nd year of Naomi Hartwell's tenure and would conclude in the 3rd. A federal monitor would be appointed for 18 months. The monitor would be a retired federal judge from the District of South Carolina. Officer Caleb Pruitt's criminal case moved at the speed criminal cases move when the United States Attorney's Office is involved. The file was referred under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. The U.S. Attorney's Office, after 7 months of review, declined to bring felony charges, citing the difficulty of proving willful intent beyond a reasonable doubt under the relevant Supreme Court standard. The office referred the matter to the state, which filed misdemeanor assault and battery charges under South Carolina Code Section 16-5-50. Pruitt entered a plea agreement at the 11th month mark. He received a suspended sentence, 24 months of probation, mandatory cultural competency training, and a permanent decertification from the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy that prevented him from working as a sworn officer in the state again. He moved out of state in the 3rd year. What he did after that, the Cape Lorton Sentinel did not follow.
The administrative track inside the department moved differently because Naomi Hartwell ran it. Pruitt's IA hearing was held in the 6th week. He was terminated with cause, which mattered for his pension calculation, which had not yet vested, and which mattered for his union appeal, which his union filed and which the union lost at the 3rd stage of arbitration. 2 other officers whose names had appeared on the 3rd and 4th pages of Audrey Marsh's anonymous packet were placed on paid administrative leave pending review of the 10-minute body cam gaps. One of those officers resigned during the review. The other was suspended for 90 days and reassigned. Sergeant Doss, the written reprimand on his file, was passed over for the promotion he had expected at the end of the fiscal year. He did not appeal. The department's body camera policy was rewritten in the 4th month. The new policy required continuous recording from the moment of cruiser door opening on any citizen contact to the moment of cruiser door closing on departure. The policy was announced at a press conference at City Hall. Whether the policy would be enforced depended on funding for the new servers, which depended on a council vote, which depended on the political weather, which depended on the result of the next municipal election. Naomi Hartwell, asked at the press conference whether she was confident the funding would come through, said only that the policy was the floor and that she would be watching. She did not say what she would be watching for. The Otis Brennan clip stayed online for 4 days. It was taken down on the 5th day, after the unedited Marigold Tisdale footage had been viewed 2.1 million times and after Otis Brennan had received a notice from his landlord, who was Charlotte Vance's sister, that his lease would not be renewed in September. Otis Brennan moved out in August. The apartment above the bookshop was relisted at a higher rent and sat empty for 14 months. The bookshop closed in the 2nd year. The storefront where Charlotte and Daughter Mercantile had been became a coffee shop. The coffee shop was owned by a woman named Hazel Pell, who had left the substation in the 2nd year, gone back to school for a business degree on a tuition program, quietly authorized by the department, and opened the shop with help from a small business loan she had qualified for on her own.
Councilman Bradley Ainsley, whose wife's silver sedan had been parked across from the boutique at 7:02 p.m. on Friday evening, was not charged with anything. The relationship between his wife's 9-minute conversation through the boutique's passenger window and Charlotte Vance's 9:37 a.m. call on Saturday morning was, in the words of Susanna Aiken's report, suggestive but not legally cognizable. The councilman did not run for re-election at the end of his term. His brother's signature on the Saturday morning continuance was noted in the IA timeline and in the federal report, and did not result in further administrative action because Captain Raymond Ainsley's retirement was, by the time the reports were finalized, 22 months old. An email chain between Sergeant Doss and a member of the City Council surfaced in the federal investigation in the 18th month. The chain was 4 messages long. It discussed personnel matters that should not have been discussed outside the department's chain of command. The councilman's name was redacted in the version released to the public because the redaction was authorized under the deliberative process exemption, and the redaction held on appeal. The Sentinel filed a separate public records suit to unseal the name. The suit was pending at the close of the 3rd year. Solomon Cleary, the reporter who had filed the suit, was still on the courthouse beat. He kept a folded sheet of paper in his jacket pocket with 3 case numbers on it. He had still not used them. He thought sometimes that he might one day. The 10-minute body cam gap from Pruitt's shift 2 weeks before the Saturday morning incident was never explained. The server logs showed the file as corrupted. The IT contractor who had been responsible for the server in the relevant quarter had left the contract 12 months before the investigation began. He could not be located for an interview. His last known address was in a state that did not respond to the subpoena. The gap stayed in the federal report as an unresolved item.
It was the second item on a list of 14 unresolved items. Naomi Hartwell served as chief of the Cape Lorden County Police Department for 6 years. She did not give interviews about the Saturday morning incident. She gave one statement at the swearing-in for her successor at the end of her 6th year, which acknowledged that the work of building a department that earned the trust of every citizen it served was work that did not finish in 6 years and would not finish in 60. Her successor was a woman she had hired into the department in her 2nd year and promoted twice. Her successor's name was Iris Calder, who had left the district attorney's office in Naomi's 3rd year to attend the Federal Law Enforcement Center, and who had risen through the department's command structure on the strength of her work, which was the only strength Naomi Hartwell had ever been willing to promote on. The notebook stayed with Naomi. The first page, with the license plate on it, was never crossed out. She kept it because some things were not for crossing out. They were for keeping. They were for reminding the person who had written them that the work of writing them down had been the work that had made everything that followed possible. The notebook went with her to her next command. It went with her to the command after that. It went with her, eventually, to a small office in Washington, where she advised on federal consent decree compliance, and it sat on the corner of her desk there, with the cover closed, and the spine cracked, and the pages soft from being turned. The license plate on the first page, the plate registered to Bellatrix Ainsley, the wife of a councilman whose brother had signed a Saturday morning continuance without reading the name on the request, was the only entry on the first page. Below it, in smaller handwriting added at some later date, was a single line. The line read, "And the rest we are still finding." What the rest was, the Cape Lorden Sentinel did not yet know. What the rest was, Solomon Cleary kept a folder for on a shelf in his office, with a paperclip on the top page and a date written in pencil on the tab. The date was the Saturday morning, 6 years past, that the rest had started from. He still added pages to the folder sometimes. He had added one the week before, about a county he had not yet visited, about a sergeant whose name he had heard mentioned at a regional conference, about a phrase in a closed file that had looked, when he saw it on a screen for 90 seconds in a courthouse hallway, very much like the phrase "casing storefronts." He had not opened that thread yet. He would. The folder was thicker than it had been a year ago. The first page of the folder had a license plate written on it.